Welcome to the Anthony John Esquire podcast. I am AJ. Today we're going to talk about political violence, and I will once again perform my magic trick of bringing together the polarized sides of our politics by probably offending both. C'est la vie. There was another assassination attempt on President Trump Saturday night, this time at the White House Correspondents Dinner that he usually boycotts. Sarah, my partner, and I were watching the previous night's Bill Maher episode with Sarah Isger when Isger mentioned the dinner, and we thought to check the news on how it was progressing. Turns out Carolyn Leavitt's unintentional prognostication that shots would be fired turned out to not be a euphemism. The 31-year-old California teacher who allegedly perpetrated the attack had no success outside the apparent shooting of one Secret Service agent who was saved by a bulletproof vest. More on that in a bit. Before I go further, let me be crystal clear about some things. I do not condone political violence. I condemn political violence. The basis for my condemning political violence is that I am a Christian and a patriot. And as a Christian, because in a nutshell, Jesus commanded nonviolence and love for our enemies without limit. And please do see our previous conversation on Christian pacifism and Bonhoeffer and our Christian nationalism series for more on that. Saints who I admire, from Peter in Gethsemane to Bonhoeffer planning to kill Hitler, they've wrestled with unconditional, unlimited nonviolence. But Jesus commands nonviolence without limit, and saints wrestle with that. Patriotism requires nonviolence up to a point, and I think that what being a patriot means is that you trust and work within the system, even when you don't like the results, as much as you can. Although there are limits to that. And that's what I'm going to talk about more today, the nonviolence up to a point. So with the understanding that I'm not calling for violence and that I am condemning it, let's take a moment to understand how these attacks on Trump's life are not only predictable, they're coming closer and closer to justifiable. And it's becoming justifiable because of Trump's own actions. That is a bold and scary claim to make, but I make it seriously, and I make it understanding that if we don't make it, if we just pretend that all of this is business as usual, we're ignoring reality in too many ways that will ultimately lead to a world where violence is inevitable, whether it's justified or not. We have to confront the fact that the rationale of the most recent would-be assassin was not crazy. I do not condone political violence. I condemn it because I am a Christian and a patriot. As a Christian, that may be the end of the story. As a patriot, it is absolutely not. Let's look at this with reference to the Declaration of Independence and World War II. Let's talk about the boy who cried wolf and reductio ad Hitlerum. We'll look at what's going on today in light of two frames of reference where almost all listeners will agree that political violence was justified, the Revolution and World War II. And we'll discuss what that means for us today. The current disposition of Trump supporters to the left is no longer to try and distinguish Trump from Hitler. It's to say that the left is ridiculous for suggesting it and has been suggesting it forever. And in part, I agree. I don't believe that the actions of Trump in his first term were peak Hitler. I think that calling him Hitler, as the left absolutely did, was premature. In this sense, they were very much the boy who cried wolf. If you keep sounding the alarm, sooner or later, people stop paying attention. And that's what happened. Back in the first administration, while Trump supporters may have rightly pointed out distinctions between the man they voted for and the modern embodiment of evil, Hitler, today they're done even entertaining that conversation. A similar dynamic can be seen with allegations of Orwellian dystopia of 1984 coming true. Again, in his first term, it was often levied against him. And I believe in as much as anyone was saying, this is full 1984, they were being hyperbolic. Again, if you cry wolf and the townfolk come to look and there's no wolf, people stop paying attention. But understand this counterpoint. The left, for the most part, wasn't saying Trump was Hitler. They were warning of what he seemed to be becoming, what he was on the clear path toward. And it should go without saying that a comparison is a comparison, not a claim of twinhood. Nobody was saying that he was the literal reincarnated DNA cloned Hitler. They were saying that he had a certain charismatic, authoritarian, nationalist, xenophobic tendency in common with Hitler, and that what he was doing tracked with what Hitler did. So Democrats on the left may be the boy who cried wolf. But remember, at the end of that story, the wolf did come. Nobody disagrees with this, right? The whole point of teaching history is not to repeat it. The whole point of 1984 isn't that it's a roadmap, it's a cautionary tragedy. So if we see something Hitlerian or Orwellian, the whole point is to identify it early, right? Not to wait until it's fully manifested, but rather to correct course early. If you make the case that the left did that too early and too often, I'd agree with you. Now, obviously, it can never be too early to stop Hitler. It can never be too early to prevent the dystopia. But I can agree that the left was too early and too often calling Trump Hitler because of everything else that was going on, from silence is violence to justifying violence against campus speech by saying Indiana Jones means punching Nazis on campus is okay, even if they aren't actual self-professed Nazis, but just people you think are morally equivalent because they don't share your viewpoint. The world the left was apparently envisioning was a dystopia of its own sort, and not the one I want to live in either. But that's not the problem today. The left isn't in power. They're not running ICE. They're not pardoning seditionists. They're not federalizing the National Guard over a governor's objection. They're not running CCOT. And yet, a lot of the right's rhetorical energy is spent positioning the left as the imminent violent threat, as if the danger to the republic is a college protester rather than the man currently in the Oval Office. That asymmetry itself is the tell. When the people in power need you to keep looking the other way, they spend a lot of time pointing at the other way. I need to clarify here that I'm not someone who has cried wolf, nor am I adding my voice to that chorus. I'm actually the kind of liberal that many of my liberal colleagues think is too conservative to be under their umbrella, because I defended people who voted for Trump even after January 6th, because I think that DEI had gone too far, because I think that liberals captured academia and media and that what we've done with both is harmful. And yet, despite all that, despite all the ways I've broken with the modern left, what I'm about to describe is enough to put me here, saying this today. Because what is happening right now isn't a left right disagreement, it's a constitutional one. So, first, let's talk about Trump's actions. Never mind most of the bad things he did the first term. January 6th, many of us thought, was a line past which no one could vote for him. Not accepting the election, insurrection. And you can debate that he explicitly told the crowd to do what it did, but what is not debatable is that he called them there. That the only reason they were in DC is that he called them. And if he had not, it wouldn't have happened. Now, January 6th is being rewritten in some very 1984 kind of ways. Just a couple of weeks ago, Ben Shapiro went on Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast with 3 million listeners and conceded that the reframing of January 6th is, in his words, corrosive of American culture. This is Ben Shapiro. This is the man who in 2021 called January 6th the most horrifying thing I've seen in American politics in my lifetime. Inexcusable, unjustifiable, awful on every level. And who now spends most of his airtime defending the administration that pardoned the rioters and rebranded them as patriots and hostages. He sat across from Sam Harris and conceded the rewrite is corrosive. He conceded that Trump called for the arrests of governors and mayors and even called for members of Congress to be hung for sedition. He conceded that the response to the political murders this year is truly terrible and morally egregious. He affirmed Sam's characterization that Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. All of that on tape in front of 3 million listeners. We'll hold on to that for a while. We're going to come back to Ben at the end of this episode. Now, we'll get into more details, but let's take a broad look at some of Trump's actions this term. Sending American troops into American cities for the publicly stated purpose of quelling protests. abducting immigrants off the streets and illegally deporting them, murdering people he suspects of being drug dealers in international waters. Doing all of this while he portrays himself as king, as pope, and as Jesus. As he mocks a Muslim country, saying, "Praise be to Allah" on Easter Sunday, and the following Tuesday threatens, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." In short, Trump is behaving so evilly that the attempts on his life are not only inevitable, they're increasingly justifiable. I'm not talking about grab them by the pussy Trump, about screw the porn star behind your pregnant wife's back Trump, about the Trump who agreed his daughter was a piece of ass he'd probably date if she wasn't his. I'm not talking about the personal failings of a broken vessel who can nonetheless be used for God's purpose. I'm talking about the official acts of the President of the United States acting in his official capacity. And no reasonable person who believes in the existence of evil can dispute that his actions are evil. If using your military to quell speech is evil, then it's evil. If killing protesters is evil, then it's evil. If abducting people and sending them to concentration camps is evil, then it's evil. If violating the laws of war is evil, then it's evil. And while I would rank it as the least of these evils, if blasphemy, if saying praise Allah as you threaten genocide and post pictures of yourself as Jesus, if blasphemy is evil, then it's evil. Now, while I'm not calling for political violence and I am condemning political violence, there are a couple of instances where almost everyone would agree that political violence was the answer. I want to outline them to underscore my point that we're not there yet, but also to underscore that we should not be this close. And we are closer than we've ever been. And to pretend that we aren't is to ignore reality. Let's start with the founding of our country. Compare the Declaration of Independence against the King to Trump's behaviors now. The Declaration, whose 250th birthday we're celebrating, begins with, "Government is instituted, by consent of the people, to secure for the people life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That it is the right of the people to alter or abolish the government that doesn't do that job. And that while we shouldn't alter or abolish governments lightly, it is our right and duty to throw off a government that's designed to reduce us." That's the preamble. Then they list their complaints. Surely not all of their complaints, but they're giving specific examples as to why they were casting off their government. Many of them are specific as to time and culture and couldn't possibly be applicable or replicated today. Likewise, they weren't saying, "This is a checklist of preconditions for the revolution." They were saying, "Here's examples of what justifies our revolution." Surely not all of them apply today, but still, let's look at the similarities. These are all the more remarkable when you acknowledge, as you must, that the democratic republic the Constitution established was absolutely designed exactly to prevent anything like these from ever happening again. And yet, here we are. The grievance for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Trump's IEEPA tariffs, for example, the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, not exactly a liberal stronghold, struck them down in February. Roberts wrote that tariffs are very clearly a branch of the taxing power that the Constitution reserved to Congress. And let's be clear, these are taxes that American companies and we as consumers have been paying. They aren't taxes that the foreign governments have been paying. These are taxes on us. The administration had collected $160 billion before the court stopped it. The grievance in the declaration was about the Stamp Act. The Supreme Court just told this president he was doing the same thing. IEEPA covers several of the declaration's grievances. Aside from tax without consent, the cutting off of our trade with all parts of the world, the suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with the power to legislate for us, which is what SCOTUS based its striking down of IEEPA on. The grievance, he has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. $410 billion in spending that Congress passed and the president refused to spend. The Constitution requires the executive to faithfully execute the laws. There's a 1974 statute called the Impoundment Control Act that Congress passed specifically to prevent this. There's a Supreme Court case from 1975, Train versus City of New York, that likely settled the question against the executive. He's doing it anyway. Likewise, forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be attained, certainly parallels conditioning federal funding on state compliance with administration immigration policies and threats to withhold federal disaster and education and transportation funds from non-compliant states. Grievance. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. Last August, Texas Democrats fled the state to deny quorum on the Trump-pushed mid-decade gerrymander. Texas Representative Nicole Collier slept on the House floor and filed a habeas corpus petition rather than sign the DPS escort permission slip that Republicans required of returning Democrats after the quorum break. From Trump's encouragements of the gerrymandering in Texas to his asserting that the feds need to take over election, his disposition to this grievance is parallel and speaks for itself. Grievance for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretend offenses. The CCOT renditions. Over 260 men sent to El Salvador in March of last year, to a Salvadorian mega prison operating under a state of exception to Salvadorian law that suspends rights for 30 days at a time and that has now been renewed for 4 straight years. The administration's own internal data, which leaked to ProPublica and the Texas Tribune, showed the majority had no U.S. criminal convictions. Many were flagged on tattoos. Pretended offenses is the 18th century phrase. It still works. CCOT covers a number of the Declaration's grievances, too, combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, was exactly the purpose of the $6 million agreement with El Salvador to detain deportees in CCOT beyond the reach of our courts. As with the depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, and making judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries, when he does exactly that of immigration so-called justices and rails against Article 3 judges that have supposedly gone rogue in ruling against him on deportation. All a good fit. Grievance. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. The January 6th pardons. Day 1, around 1,500 people, more than 600 of them had been convicted of or pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement. 170 used a deadly weapon. And then, in November, the fake elector pardons. Giuliani, Eastman, Powell, Meadows, Clark, Cheeseborough, Ellis, the rest of them. 77 people who participated in the scheme to nullify the election. The trial got dissolved retroactively, making a mockery of it, a mock trial. Beyond that, the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy that he shelters from even a pretend trial. Grievance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Trump's deploying of federal forces, including 4,000 California National Guard troops federalized over the governor's objection, attempted deployments to Chicago, Portland, Memphis, New Orleans. Federal Judge Charles Breyer found the LA deployment violated the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. That act exists because of this grievance. It is a direct lineal descendant of these words in the Declaration. The federal court used the founders' framing to strike it down. And while ICE isn't an army per se, there can be no doubt that they are a paramilitary force that has been sent in a surge to Minnesota that outnumbered the combined number of police that area has on its own. And it was certainly not only without the consent of the state, but over the repeated and stressed objections of the state. As the Declaration put it, he has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. And here, again, he rails against the judges restraining him from such actions and calls for their impeachment. Now, most listeners who adopt the orthodox narrative of the founding of our country can't help but agree that the founding of our country was an occasion for political violence. These are what the revolution was based on. Again, the list of evils in the Declaration was not a checklist by which revolutions must be justified. It was a list of what justified the revolution at the time, and certainly many of them aren't present today. But the ones that are, that I've listed above, are occurring under a structure that was actively designed to present it, and are occurring only because Trump has decreed it. Of the 27 grievances in the Constitution, there are 12 that are pretty strong analogs to what he's doing today, 8 that are partial, and only 7 that are either weak or don't apply. 20 out of 27 in a system designed explicitly to prevent them. If you're looking at our own Declaration of Independence, you can't pretend that the people who want Trump dead are crazy. His actions largely resemble those our country went to war over, that our country went to war to put an end to, that our country was founded to put an end to. Let's look at a more recent example with World War II. Now, I can hear the eyes rolling, and I understand. The left really did accuse Trump of being Hitler too early and too often, with the result that they lost a lot of credibility and people tuned them out. So I'm not going to ask you to trust me on this. I'm going to show you with particularity what I'm talking about. This isn't going to be the same as comparing the Trump administration's behavior to King George's. We don't have an explicit list of grievances. This comparison has to be built from what actually happened. But let me take the most conservative view possible to illustrate that we're much further down the path to Hitler than we should be. The author I'm looking at is the late Paul Johnson, Spectator columnist for decades, friend of Margaret Thatcher, eulogized by William F. Buckley. There is no plausible move on the right to call Paul Johnson a left-winger. His book, Modern Times, is treated as the conservative history of the 20th century. So I'm not parroting some blue-haired gender studies professor with complaints about an administration she doesn't like in the first place. We're looking at what one of the most respected conservative historians of the 20th century said about how Hitler took an existing democracy apart. Johnson's chapter on Nazi consolidation is built around specific instances: dated decrees, named events, identifiable persons. He doesn't argue about whether to call something fascism. He just lists what happened. And he summarizes the whole arc with a sentence that should sit very uncomfortably with anyone paying attention right now. It had taken Hitler less than 5 months to destroy the German democracy completely. 5 months, not 5 years. 5 months from the day Hitler took office to the day there was no constitutional government left in Germany. The democracy did not collapse from the outside. It was disassembled from the inside in dated steps by people who said they were just executing the law. Let me give you some of the steps Johnson lists, along with what's actually happening here in America today. First, Germany, the Civil Service Law of April 1933, paragraph 71. Hitler's law authorized removing any judge or official whose official activities, in particular through his decisions, showed his worldview was alien to the National Socialist worldview. Today in America, Schedule F, Trump's Day 1 executive order, reclassifies tens of thousands of career civil servants as political appointees, removing tenure protections from anyone whose work shows their worldview is alien to the administration's. Same mechanism, different vocabulary. The Constitution's firewall on Article 3 judges held. Hitler had no analog because Article 3 didn't exist in Weimar. The firewall on the rest of the executive branch, including on immigration judges and the DOJ, is being breached as we speak. Then take Hitler on lawyers. Johnson quotes Hitler directly. A lawyer must be regarded as a man deficient by nature or deformed by experience. Hitler hated lawyers. He superimposed on the ordinary courts the Nazi people's courts, a parallel system for political offenses, which reached its apogee under Roland Freisler in 1944 to 45, screaming sentences at defendants on his way to thousands of death verdicts. Today, an administration that has issued executive orders specifically targeting individual American law firms for representing the wrong clients. Perkins Coie, Wilmer Hale, Jenner and Block, Sussman Godfrey. Each executive order stripped security clearances, terminated federal contracts, and barred members from federal buildings. Several other firms, Paul Weiss, Skadden, Milbank, Latham, they cut settlement deals, hundreds of millions in pro bono work for administration-favored causes in exchange for being left alone. Federal courts struck most of the executive orders down as facially unconstitutional retaliation. The lawyers who fought back won. But the message, represent the wrong client, lose your livelihood, was the entire point. The people's courts didn't replace the regular courts. They sat on top of them, and the regular courts learned to be careful. That's the move. Then there's Dachau. The first Nazi concentration camp opened March 22nd, 1933, announced openly in the press by Himmler. Protective custody until further notice. Indefinite detention. Deliberately situated outside ordinary law. Today, CCOT, March 2025. 260 men sent to El Salvador. Indefinite detention under Bukele's regime's state of exception. That 30-day suspension of rights, renewed for 4 years. Deliberately situated outside U.S. judicial reach. Different scale, same template. Judge James Boasberg ruled in December that the men should not have been removed in the manner that they were, with virtually no notice and no opportunity to contest the basis for their removal, in clear violation of their due process rights. That ruling is the gap between today and 1933. The men are still in CCOT. The breach is real. Then the Hossbach Memorandum of November 1937. Hitler told his military and foreign policy chiefs that an active expansion phase would now begin. War Minister Blomberg and Army Commander Fritsch protested. Both were forced out within weeks. Fritsch on a fabricated homosexuality charge from a Himmler file. Today, General Charles Q. Brown, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, fired in February of last year. Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, fired the same week. Multiple flag officers retired or transferred. Senior JAG officers fired. Inspectors General fired. Johnson's phrase for what happened in February 1938 was, "The last bastion of the old order fell to Hitler without a murmur." We are not there. We are closer than we've ever been. Then there's the citizenship stripping. Johnson reports that within months of taking power, the Nazi regime began publishing serial lists of émigrés stripped of their German citizenship. The August 1933 list took the citizenship of Heinrich Mann, Leon Feuchtwanger, and Kurt Tucholsky. The March 1934 list took Einstein. Later lists took Brecht, Thomas Mann, and scores more. Johnson's framing, thousands of Jews and anti-Nazi university professors and journalists who were prevented from making a living in Germany and were virtually obliged to emigrate. Today, in America, the Mahmoud Khalil case, Columbia undergraduate student, lawful permanent resident, detained by ICE after leading pro-Palestinian protests. The Rumeysa Öztürk case, Tufts doctoral student on a valid visa snatched off the street by plainclothes federal agents over an op-ed. The birthright citizenship executive order, stated intent to pursue denaturalization of naturalized citizens who publicly criticize the administration. Different scale, same template. Strip status from people whose speech the regime finds inconvenient and make them go away. Federal courts have pushed back. Attempts to limit birthright citizenship have been enjoined. Mahmoud Khalil got out, But the chilling effect was the entire point. Ask any non citizen academic on an American campus today how freely they speak. The answer is the answer. And finally, the visuals. Johnson on how Hitler actually built his support. Hitler's strength was that he shared with so many other Germans the devotion to the national images, new and old, misty forests breeding blonde titans, smiling peasant villages under the shadow of ancestral castles. Johnson, quoting Walter Benjamin, the aesthetization of politics, the art without the substance. Spectacle as governance, the flattering picture of the Volk substituted for the messier reality of pluralism. In America today, the Department of Homeland Security social media, Norman Rockwell's paintings posted with anti-immigrant captions, Rockwell's saluting the flag with the caption, "Protect our American way of life," his working on the Statue of Liberty with, "Become a homeland defender today," plus Thomas Kincaid pastorals and John Gast's American Progress, the 1972 Manifest Destiny painting where a glowing white figure sweeps westward and pushes indigenous people off the canvas as she goes. The Rockwell family publicly rebuked DHS in November of 2025. They cited the Rockwell DHS isn't posting the problem we all live with, his 1964 painting of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges being escorted by federal marshals into a desegregated school past a wall stained with a thrown tomato and a slur. That's the Rockwell DHS won't touch. The Rockwell's DHS will touch are the wholesome, white, mid-century ones, the exact national images, new and old, register that Johnson described Hitler reaching for. DHS kept posting after the family asked them to stop. That's the dog whistle. To the audience that hears it, it says that the real America is the white, Christian, mid-century America that the paintings depict, and that the bureaucratic violence of mass deportations is in service of restoring it. Hitler's regime made the same move with different art. Paul Johnson described it. The Rockwell family is saying it now. I could go on and on and on. Immigrants polluting our blood, rhetoric analogous to Reichstag, press and opposition are enemies within. But if you're not convinced by now, those probably won't convince you either, and nothing possibly could. But for the reasonable people listening, compare the examples this conservative author said characterized Hitler with all the examples I've given you of what Trump is doing today. The structural matches are not all of them. They're not even most of them. But the ones that match closely. And they match precisely on the axes the post-war constitutional order was built to make impossible. Now, I think Trump falls short of both King George and Hitler, but he's certainly on the same trajectory for all the reasons I've gone over and so many more. Those are just the least debatable. So again, if you're looking at what we fought against in World War II, you can't just pretend that the people who want Trump dead are crazy. His actions largely resemble those our country went to war over, that our country went to war to put an end to. So we all agree that there are times when political violence is justified. The revolution was justified. World War II was justified. And we're not just saying armies and declarations of war. Certainly, the King of England would not have recognized the right of our founders to do such a thing. But more to the point, practically no one today is criticizing Bonhoeffer for his attempts to assassinate Hitler. And of those who approve of him, no one is approving merely because there happened to have been a declaration of war. Now, certainly you can argue that anyone who picks up a gun is crazy. But the most recent would-be assassin, the man I mentioned at the top of the show, the California teacher, apparently had none of the warning signs and left a manifesto that wasn't the most articulate, but it certainly wasn't crazy. It described limiting the use of force. He explicitly took hotel security, the Capitol Police, the National Guard, hotel employees, and guests off his target list. He said that if the Secret Service came for him, he'd incapacitate them non-lethally, if possible. The manifesto described his grievances, the boat strikes, the deportation camps, the executions without trial. It described the motivation in explicitly Christian terms. He preempted two Christian objections to what he was about to do: turn the other cheek, render unto Caesar's, and rebutted them, not well, but coherently. He wrote this on the page: I don't expect forgiveness, but if I could have seen any other way to get this close, I would have taken it. He wrote this: It's awful. I want to throw up. Can't really recommend it. That is not the writing of psychosis. That is the writing of a man who built himself a moral framework, applied it, and acted on it. So, attempts on Trump's life are not only increasingly predictable, they're increasingly defensible. Those who think, this is crazy, this just isn't done in civilized society, we need to just condemn it. I agree we need to condemn it. And we need to recognize that this is a time unlike any other, that modern nation states do fail, that if we don't want ours to fall, it's going to mean a lot more than just saying condemn violence. What is the answer to this? Thankfully, there's not one answer. There are several. There's something for all of us to do. For those on the left, abstain from violence. Encourage others to do the same, explicitly and publicly. Talk about what remedies are left and how to use them, how to use the courts, how to actually encourage Congress to stand up. Our system has not failed yet. The Supreme Court struck down the IEEPA tariffs in February. Article 1 held. Federal courts have enjoined the birthright citizenship executive order under Wong Kim Ark in the 14th Amendment. The injunctions are holding. Judge Breyer found the LA National Guard deployment violated the Posse Comitatus Act. The Supreme Court rejected the administration's emergency request to deploy the Guard to Chicago. Posse Comitatus is doing exactly what Posse Comitatus was passed to do. Judge Boasberg ruled that the CCOT detainees were denied due process. The administration is contesting it. The judiciary is fighting back. Last week and this week, the Supreme Court is hearing oral argument in 3 cases the administration has staked positions on. Bondi versus Lau for the burden shifting on deportation green card holders, Chatry versus United States on geofence warrants in the Fourth Amendment, Mullen versus Doe on the termination of temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of people. The judiciary is engaged. The press is operating. The manifesto written by the man who tried to shoot the president on Saturday night was published in full by the New York Post within 24 hours. That doesn't happen in regimes that have collapsed. That happens in republics that still have free presses. The power of protest was made evident in Minnesota. Renee Good and Alex Preddy were tragically killed, but make no mistake, it was the outcry over ICE's presence and over their murders that led to Bonvino being sent away and Holman taking his place, to Bondi being fired and Blanche taking her place. The 2024 election was free. The midterms are 6 months away. The 2028 election is coming. The mechanism for replacing this administration, the way the Constitution intends, by votes, has not been disabled. Universities are operating. Under pressure, still operating. State governments are operating. Civil society is operating. The Constitution is not yet in shreds. It is in deep stress, and the structure built to handle deep stress is doing its job. Slower than we'd like, but it's doing it. So yeah, things are bad for all of the reasons I outlined above, but they're not over, and our system can still be used to combat Trump. As long as it can be, recourse to guns is not necessary. And as long as the people on the left who are tempted toward where Cole Allen got, and I have no doubt some are, keep being told that publicly and loudly by the rest of us, we hold the line. For the right, I'm going to come back to Ben Shapiro as an example of what you need to stop doing. On his appearance with Sam, having conceded everything we talked about earlier, he said this: "It comes as a bundle." As if the constitutional rewrite of an attack on the Capitol is on the same ledger as the marginal tax rate. That's the moral arithmetic the right is openly performing right now. That's Ben Shapiro saying it. I'm not making this up. Sam's confrontation of Ben clearly riled him because 2 days later, Saturday, April 25th, the same week the Harris podcast dropped, Ben doubled down. Shapiro put out a video on his own show titled, "Why I Don't Regret My Vote for Trump." Quote, "I do not regret my vote for President Trump in 2024. Not one iota, not one bit." Quote, "I find the entire conversation about regret pretty confusing because here's the thing. The alternative would have been a President Kamala Harris." Ben's specifics, the actual reasons he stands by his vote, were trans issue executive orders, the immigration crackdown, the DEI rollback. That is the bundle. That is what he means by bundle. Pause for a second. The same man in the same week, Sam Harris's podcast, The Constitutional Rewrite is Corrosive of American Culture. Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. He called for governors and members of Congress to be hung for sedition. The response to political murders is morally egregious. On his own show 2 days later, "I don't regret it, not one iota, because the trans executive orders and the immigration crackdown." That is the calculus. He knows what he just said about the regime. He said it on tape in front of millions of listeners. And the math he is publicly performing is, yes, the constitutional rewrite is corrosive, but compared to what Kamala would have done about pronouns in federal forms, the corrosion is worth it. This is why we are closer than we should be. Not because conservatives are evil or stupid or fascist, because major conservative voices, a man with millions of weekly listeners, is publicly modeling a move that says, "I see the corrosion, I've named the corrosion, and I'm voting for the corrosion anyway because the policy outcomes are good." That move, modeled at scale, is exactly how alternatives stop being alternatives. It's how a system starts running out of road. A system requires people inside the regime to push back when it overreaches. Shapiro just told millions of listeners not to. What conservatives need to do is to maintain their policy positions for sure, but push back on the illegality and craziness and evil of the man delivering them. The two are separable. You can want a tighter border and not want masked agents pulling people off the street with no due process. You can want lower taxes and not want IEEPA tariffs the Supreme Court just struck down as an usurpation of Congress's taxing power. You can want a serious foreign policy that takes American interests seriously and not want Munich II played out over Ukraine. You can want fewer DEI mandates without wanting Schedule F to gut civil service. The policy outcomes you wanted in 2024 are largely available without the constitutional rewrite Trump is using to deliver them. The constitutional rewrite is what's making this dangerous. It is also what actual, traditional, constitution-loving conservatives should be most allergic to. So push back, publicly. Not under your breath in a New York Times op-ed where the people who already agree with you will read it. Loudly, in the venues the people who voted for him are listening to. Tell your senator, tell your representative, tell your county GOP, tell your pastor, tell your friends, tell your family, tell Trump. The hardest version of this, and I know it because I'm asking my own side to do its version too, is to dissent inside the room where it costs you something. Not on a podcast where your audience is going to nod and click like and subscribe. In the room where the people you have to keep liking you are sitting. That is what Bonhoeffer called the cost of discipleship. It is what the conservatism I grew up reading called putting country before party. It is exactly what the right is being asked to do now. And it is being asked of you precisely because you are the only people who can do it. And let me be honest with you about the asymmetry of what I'm asking. I'm asking the left to mostly keep doing what most of the left is already doing. The courts, the rallies, the votes, the patience, the not shooting anybody. The left has the easier task, and they need to do it. I'm asking the right to do something harder, to dissent from inside the regime that's delivering them their policy wins. That is not the same ask, and I'm not pretending it is. The right has the harder job to do. And that is exactly why the job falls to them. The people inside the regime are the only people who can stop the regime. That's not unfair. That's just how this works. You can disagree with me all you want, but two things. First, you're wrong. Feel free to check my math on the parallels between the Declaration, Hitler, and Trump, and you'll find that, if anything, I was being restrained. The only reasonable conclusion is that while we can and must continue to condemn political violence, we can't pretend that the evil being perpetrated by Trump is somehow different than what has historically been held to rightly justify political violence. Second, as to what I'm prescribing, what else can you actually do? Where does it get you? I'm offering you a diagnosis and a prescription. The diagnosis doesn't go away because you reject it. It just gets harder to treat while you wait. And the cost of waiting isn't just paid by me. It's paid by everyone, by the country we all have to live in. We can still pull back, but we can't pull back forever. So let's do the work. This is the Anthony John Esquire podcast. I am AJ.